Okay, so let's talk about the difference between the ACT and the SAT. Okay, and in general, the way it works is in terms of the scoring. For the ACT, each subject is out of 36. We'll talk about the percentiles in a minute, but each scoring is 36 points apiece. They average that to get what they call your composite score. So your best composite score and your best score on each of the subjects is 36 points. Okay, and then on the digital SAT, each subject is from 200 to 800 points, and they add those together. So the best score you can get is 1,600 points for that. And as you can see, the way they work, these are the English, math, reading, science for the ACT in order, and you get the verbal twice, or the two verbal modules first, and then the math module second on the SAT. And the way I like to talk about the difference between the ACT and the SAT is that the ACT is much more of a sprint. The questions tend to be much more straightforward, but there's a lot of questions in a shorter period of time. So what's really going on is that the student really has to move quickly. So if your student tends to be more methodical, likes to take their time, the ACT may not be the right test for you. But if they're the type of student who really just likes to move quickly through the test, you can get it down, the ACT is often a good test for those students. It's also a good test for students who need extra time, because it really tends to, because that extra time really does tend to help. Because like I said, the questions are not as tricky. Like I talk about the SAT as more of an obstacle course. There's more, especially on the math side, there's more IQ-based learning, which is really sort of where the SAT kind of came from. And so they still use a lot of those sort of IQ test functions in there. So it tends to be a little tricky. Once you know the tricks, though, it tends to be okay. They tend to do all right with it. But it is a bit more of an obstacle course, whereas the ACT is much more of a sprint. Sometimes I like to say that it's a lot easier to show students how to get over those obstacles than it is to get them to run more quickly. If they really are just slow and methodical, you really don't want to have to just push them to do it, because their accuracy goes down and so on and so forth. But if they do tend to just move quickly through tests, and you get a lot of students who do this, they just like the straightforwardness of it, and they just move quickly, then there really is a difference in the types of students that like each test. The practice tests for these are the planned sophomore PSAT for sophomores and juniors, just basically an introductory test for them. Juniors, for junior year, the PSAT offers National Merit Scholarship qualifiers, so that you can and you can get a little money back for it. It's also something nice to put on your application. Tends to be top 2% of your state. Now, since California is the most populous state, then it's a little more difficult. On the last PSAT last year, I think it was something around 1440 to get in the top 2%. Getting back to your question from before deciding how to decide between the SAT and ACT, really good idea. I love to have my students take both tests first. Now, not everybody does this, but you have my students take both tests, and then we compare scores to see which one they actually are doing better at. And a lot of times it's a feel for the student as well, like it's just ACT is just too quick, or SAT is just a little too complicated. I didn't understand how were they writing the questions. But these are specific concordance tables that are accepted by everybody, basically. These are the official concordance tables, which show you sort of what a score equates to on the other test. So, for instance, if you get a 30 on your ACT score there, that's the equivalent of a 1370 on your SAT. Make sense? Okay. So use the concordance tables, find out what's going on. I will tell you that usually a student takes both tests. They're going to come out usually about a point better, ACT point better on the ACT than the SAT to start. Like usually when you see that, if a student will take a test, that usually tells me their actually aptitude is pretty much the same, because the test once I get a student in, a lot of that point difference is really just the formatting of the test is a little more tricky. Once they understand sort of how the format works and sort of what they're looking at, that point differential goes away. So if you're a little better on the ACT just to start, I wouldn't necessarily take that to the bank that that's the one I want to take. But if if there's a real difference in the numbers, then you really want to go with it. But it's also having the students take it to get familiar with the test, but also how you feel about that test. You know, what test you feel more comfortable using is a big important factor, because if you just feel like you're struggling with it, it's really not going to be fun to do. But if you feel like, yeah, I feel comfortable doing this, I can do this, then you're really going to learn more when you're doing the prep for it.